Work-life balance is a difficult issue, and I will likely be interrupted by both my dog and my children because that's the subject of this whole presentation. So that's inevitable. All right, so my name is Margie McGee-Newton, and I'm the Director of Career Education at DePaul. I oversee the advising team as well as the career curriculum. We developed these Alumni MasterClass workshops starting this fall because we really wanted to create content that met the needs of our alums. The other thing I'll say, and I'll repeat this at the end, is we have a lot of Career Center events and programs that may also be of interest to you. So before we go, I'll throw a link in the chat for how to request a handshake account if you don't already have one. Some of you probably found us through Alumni Relations. The benefits to having a handshake account is that you would see all of the events we're hosting. Like I said, I'll give you a sampler at the end. All right, so today we're focusing on finding and maintaining a work-life balance. This topic has exploded. It's been on a lot of people's minds for a long time, but the pandemic has really changed things for people. And I start this presentation with a couple of stats around how work lives have changed. This is going to be different for everyone. Obviously, I'm working remotely from home. Some folks are working from offices or from wherever they work. Some folks are juggling childcare. Some folks are juggling caregivers. But essentially, according to Bloomberg, US homebound employees are logging 3 hours more per day on the job, which is a lot. We go through another stat that kind of delineates it. But essentially, we're looking at a world where there are no boundaries for the homebound employees anyway. There are no boundaries between work and life. And like I said, this will probably become even more obvious when my children interrupt me tonight. The other stat I collected for this, again from Bloomberg, was that by early April 2020, about 45% of workers said they were burned out. So this happened pretty quickly, and for obvious reasons. There's a lot of uncertainty around the pandemic. We're also kind of all scrambling to change the way we do things. Healthcare, obviously, certain industries have just exploded. Logistics has exploded as far as work hours. I know that there are nurses working 12-hour shifts with no days off for more than a month. But even folks like myself who are working remotely, there's just this feeling of being burned out. And that's why we wanted to bring this content to you. Final step before we get started, and this is where we really sit down and do the math. The average worker is putting in 48 minutes longer per day. That means at the end of the year, that's 4.5 extra work weeks that the average American worker has worked. And that is on top of the fact that the American work week is already really intensive and very few people take even the vacation days that they are offered. So that's why this is a pretty immediate need for us to talk about. And what we wanted to do was, rather than just kind of wallow in the anxiety of it, was really come up with what are some good concrete tactical steps for managing this. We have 7 steps. There's many iterations of this. In this deck, I will be pointing you to quite a few resources around some of these steps. Really, we're just kind of this is really more of a presentation around, here are some concepts around maintaining work-life balance, but there's definitely more work and resources you can pursue on your own. We'll start with number 1, focus on your day, and then we'll go through the rest. Any questions yet? I always forget to wait and listen. All right, let's get into it. Feel free, like I said, unmute, sorry, and ask a question anytime. So this one's a big one, and I know it sounds really simple, but depending on who you are, I'm a planner. I would like to know exactly what my kids are doing for summer camp this year, if there is indeed a summer camp. I would like to know exactly what next year they're doing. I can't do that right now, and the frustration, what that makes me do is really hyper-focus on the things I can control, like work. But I think it's super important to really, in terms of your work and maybe even your life, start with just the day, and for me, I actually use, this isn't really necessarily a tactical piece of advice, but I use this, let's see if you can see it, a weekly planner Post-it, because the temporal aspect of it makes it easy for me to really sketch out what I think I'm going to get done. And then I use the smaller Post-its to plan what I'm doing each of those days. Do I do all of those things? No, I certainly don't. But I go into the day with a single big task, or at least a single or, you know, a couple smaller priorities. I think that part of this is kind of psychological, which is obviously like the resisting the urge to plan everything out to the 10th degree, because that's not always the best use of our time and it can slow us down in terms of making progress. But I do think coming up with a daily planning ritual, whatever that is for you, like I said, for me, I actually really like the Post-it approach because it just feels like this thing that I can move if I need. And what you can't see on my computer is I have all these Post-its down here of things that I didn't get done that I put up here. And then I'm like, all right, this can move back and forth. I'm also a really tactical person, but thinking through what's a daily planning ritual where either I sit down the night before and I do this sketch or I do it in the morning. It's also important to stay focused by watching out for distractions. Now, nothing makes me crazier than this advice when I can't change the fact that I don't have a door behind me between me and my children. I can't change the fact that my dog wanders and naps in my living room. Oh, there he is. So I get really annoyed when people go, remove all distraction, like dogs and kids. And I'm like, well, okay, well, that's a nice world. That's not where I live. But really, like, what are those things that might distract you? For me, obviously, it's going to be some technology. I work in this space because I'm nowhere near the television. But thinking through what those things are can be really helpful. And most of these steps really kind of add to each other. This is a quote and some bonus content. He has this, Amir has a company called Doist that has a really interesting guide to planning your day. I'm just going to click out to that to show you what that looks like. It's a really interesting productivity practice that I'm not going to get into, but this link will be functional in the deck that I send you. So that you can check it out if you're interested. But I liked this quote because he talked about really reevaluating tasks and not thinking through, like, of course, you're not going to finish everything every day, but it helps you really reassess, was that something I had to get done today? The reason it didn't get done might be because it wasn't something I had to get done that day, but really planning and replanning and not feeling like one thing is bad, one thing is good, but removing that judgment from it and just really having a daily ritual. All right, we'll go to the next one. The other thing, and this is hard for a lot of people to do, is to practice saying no. This is one of the things that I struggle with the most, you know, which is partially why I'm delivering all the alumni masterclasses. Actually, the next one is going to be Karen McCoy. It's not to be missed. But setting boundaries at work can be really, really hard. I mean, setting boundaries at home can be hard too. But that's something that, particularly for those of you who are working remotely right now, is super important to do. It's never that you're going to say to your boss, I'm not doing that. I don't have time for that. Like, in no world are you going to talk to someone like that. But there are ways and there are strategies you can take around setting some of these boundaries. So for example, we have a little baby script here. If you get tasked with a project or offered a project that is just beyond what you can achieve right now, there is this way to kind of sandwich that feedback. Like, I'd be really excited to do this, but, you know, I need your help prioritizing how this is going to happen with the amount of work that I have on my plate. Like, that is a style choice you can make where saying no becomes easier. And that's the challenge for most of us. We've been socialized, particularly at work, to never say no. This is a good way, a good strategy to have in your pocket when you do need either help changing priorities or you do need to manage the amount of work you've been asked to do. Another boundary is, this is, again, something I'm really bad at. I send emails all night. I send them on weekends. When I was preparing this presentation this Sunday, I kept thinking, like, oh, I really should not be emailing everyone I work with on the weekend, because it does set this perception around how, you know, people's time and their boundaries and my disrespect for their boundaries. I have a boss, or I had a former boss, who would literally write the email and then schedule delivery for Monday morning at 9 a.m. She would not send it, even though she'd finished it. In her head, it was gone. She wouldn't send it. She would schedule delivery for 9 a.m., which I think is great because it's very empathetic for her employees. If you have a relationship with your manager where you don't mind that back and forth, that's a different thing. But really do feel like you can wait until the start of business hours. You can always go to your manager or people you work with and say, you know what, if I get this in the middle of the night, I'm really stressed. Some of my colleagues, rather than that, just say, just FYI, I don't check my email on weekends. And for me, I would lose my mind. I like being in the middle of a messy workday all 7 days, which is why I shouldn't be giving this presentation. But for my colleagues who have those boundaries, I really respect it. And in fact, I'm probably going to have to take some of this advice that I'm giving and attempt some of this for myself. The other thing is, depending on if you're remote or if you're in person, something else we see in terms of challenging workspaces is what I would call like someone who's a bit of a sponge in terms of sucking some of your energy or kind of taking more time than they need with either problems or conversation or whatever it is. And I think that that's something a lot of us in the remote time are starving for social contact. So it can be really hard to feel like, you know what, I just need to sit down and get to my workday. If only I could just, do this politely. And I think it's important to be ready and to be equipped to say to someone, hey, I want to work with you on this. I want to hear more, but I got to get A, B, and C done. So let me follow back with you or like check back in with you after I've done this. So really step 2 is just giving yourself permission to say no, to set boundaries, and to navigate those boundaries. This is a great quote in terms of balance. Balance is not better time management, but better boundary management. And that's something I think we need to remind ourselves over and over and over, that we have choices to make around what labor we take on, what emotional labor, what other kinds of labor we take on, and that it's kind of up to us to establish some of those boundaries. It's empowering, but it can be challenging. Step 3, and step 3 definitely bleeds into step 4, calendar. I'm sure everyone's using either GCal or Outlook calendar, et cetera. But really sitting down and time blocking. Now, if this isn't something you've already been doing, time blocking just means obviously setting aside either a regular chunk of time or an irregular chunk of time for the bigger work you need to do. So for example, I might block the first 30 minutes of every day just to reply to emails. I might block, let's say if I'm doing a project where I'm creating a slide deck or a presentation, I might block 3 hours on Friday where I just put on my calendar and I put in there the detail, work on presentation. That's something that can help you both feel like you're more in control and also help you figure out what you're doing when. That can be another big challenge, especially when we're on our computers from the minute we wake up till the minute we go to bed. I don't necessarily know where all my time's gone. So if I can plan it, I can also then capture it and look at, oh, this took me about 2 hours. I was able to shave this a little bit. I think it's also important to really think through on our calendar, what is super important? Are there meetings that can be canceled? Are there meetings that can be shortened? Are there projects that you're giving yourself 4 hours for that really you need 8 hours for? But checking in regularly on your calendar to see where these open spaces exist or to see where they need to be placed. Because time blocking is important for accomplishing things, but it's also important to have a chunk of your week or day that isn't totally blocked, because things will pop up and you'll have to shuffle things around. Sorry, I'm going to just take a sip of my tea. The other piece of this is, because technology serves every need we have in terms of it's a social space, it's a space for entertainment, it's a space for communication, it's a space for work, et cetera. It feels like we need to be connected all the time and we need to have it in front of us all the time. So for example, my Teams, I don't turn Teams off, right? Like that's a choice I'm making to have it open all the time, which means I'm open for business. That's a choice I shouldn't be making as far as work-life balance. The other thing is sometimes it can be easy, and I fall into this myself, to feel like, oh, I'm going to have this one thing going while I'm doing this other thing, right? Especially for those of you with 2 monitors. What's more tempting than that? There are times when that works really well, but there are also times where that multitasking slows everything down, particularly if it's non-essential. So I think it's important for us to really pay attention to like this connectivity and calendar in time when you're not connected, where you're not accessible in that way. And that transitions directly into step 4, or tech technique number 4, which is to schedule breaks. This is core to work-life balance in terms of really not having the commute time. Like I'm someone who rode the train in, I mean, albeit I had to run to the train every day, but I rode the train into downtown, and that 35 minutes in the morning, 40 minutes was my me time. That was, I didn't try and work on the train. I just sat there and did whatever I did. And it was truly a break. Like I just didn't use the time for anything other than nothing. And now that doesn't exist. You know, I get up, I do the stuff with the kids, I get onto the computer. You have to, if you're working remotely, you have to actually schedule those breaks. You can't rely on those to happen necessarily organically. And I think one of the mistakes I made early on in the pandemic was to think, oh, when I pick up the kids and make them lunch, that'll be my break. That's not a break, right? That's, anyone with children knows that that is the opposite of a break. That is work time I'm doing for my other boss, which is my family. And so forcing myself to go in and carve out those 30 minutes or 40 minutes for things like a walk, a lunch break, signing up for a class. I just signed up for a clay class on Wednesdays because I have a flexible work schedule right now because of the pandemic. I scheduled that as a way, because I knew I needed the refuel. I needed the balance, and I had to force that balance there. The other side of the coin here is that social media time, which we kind of pretend is a break sometimes. Like maybe you're like, you know what, I'm going to take a 10-minute break. I'm going to pull out my phone and I'm just going to like do that. That doesn't necessarily give you the same break as the other things we've talked about. And I'm not saying your breaks can only be exercise. Like that's absurd. That's a whole nother like list of things you have to do. But I do think it's important to think through how much time am I spending with technology, particularly technology that, you know, I have on during the workday. How is that interrupting my breaks, or how is that taking form in my breaks? Part of this also includes decluttering not just your physical workspace, but your digital workspace, right? So like maybe there's, especially if you're one of those 2-monitor people, maybe it's easy to have like Twitter open while you're working on a doc. That's not, I'm not here to say that's right or wrong, but it does take space in your head, right? And it does disrupt on some level from the breaks. Also physically shutting down or closing your computer at the end of the day, or, you know, signing out of your inbox. These are ways to force an actual break rather than, oh, I'm going to take a break, but I'm going to sit here playing with my phone. And then when I get an email from work, I'm going to answer it. Like, so those are all just tips in terms of being more fastidious about what our breaks look like, if possible, if you're in a remote workspace. This one's really fun because this is something we should be doing all the time. A lot of these, you know, are really specific to the pandemic, although they existed before, but they're kind of amorphous, you know, boundaries are amorphous right now. This is something I think everybody could be doing regularly as a way to really feel like they are maintaining that work-life balance. Is really exploring what are your values. The tool I'm linking to here is a life values inventory. I don't know why it's giving me this. Let me just quickly, don't worry guys, I'm not going to send you spam. That link is just very angry. Okay, I'm just going to go. This is a safe site. There must be some weird certificate happening with my browser. But what I love about this is a really, and you can create an account for free. They're not going to sell your data. It's whenever we provide an assessment like this, we do a little bit of homework to make sure that this isn't something where they're going to try and monetize your data or, you know, harass you with emails. But basically what I love about it, and of course at the end they will try and sell your report, but don't buy it. You're going to get all you need by going through this process, but it's a very cool online tool to assess what are your values. Think about the intersection between your values and the work you're doing, and values outside of work, right? So like really dipping in, like what's a thing I want to spend time on doing that's not work. So for example, you know, do you want to volunteer once a month at a food pantry? Do you want to really start this like casual artistic practice. And I'm not, maybe it's a pandemic hobby, maybe it's something else, but really thinking through what are your values can be really useful in terms of maintaining this balance between work and life. I think we think of work and life as your job. I think I did the wrong one. Your job and your family. And there's so much outside of family. And there's so much outside of like what we see as like social life necessarily that could be your personal passion, your artistic passion, could be, a hobby, like I said, it could be just something, a social cause. So I think it is helpful when you're thinking about work-life balance to sit down and really look at your values and how they play out in how you use your time at work, outside of work, etc. Any questions so far? I know I'm going really fast. I've had a lot of caffeine today. Oh, I see a question. This is a good question. What if you're the main subject matter expert who knows the risk associated with the project that another person doesn't know, as far as like boundaries go? That can be very challenging. And I would say that would be a case where you would be consider yourself a consultant in some spaces. Like it's hard to do, it's hard to delegate. But what I do with my team, when my team wants to create something or work on something that I don't have the time to lead, what I do is I ask them to basically draft and then put a meeting on my calendar to check in on that project. Like they are managing up. If you can get the people who report into you or who work with you to manage up or sideways, that's going to help you out a lot. But it is a challenge. Like it's a challenge. Boundaries are very difficult when you have a specific skill set and knowledge set. But I think there's a lot of strategies for that, mostly related to creating a structure, a project management structure, using Asana or another project management tool. Let's go to the next one. This one I really love. This is about habit. This is about tricking your brain into feeling a certain way. But if you establish transition cues, meaning create a little ritual for when you start work, create a little practice for when you end work. Particularly the work starting and the wrap up routine, these will really, if you're intentional about what these are, these will give you that closure you need at the end of the day that you don't always get. Like even before the pandemic, I didn't get that. I'd still come home, make dinner for my kids, hop on my computer and see if there are any emails I needed to reply to. I had no closure. It was just open all the time. My desktop sitting here open in the living room. I pass it every time I move through my house. But really thinking through what are you doing to be at the beginning of work, to be at the end of work. And those cues can be a lot of different things. It could be like, I like to start the day with a giant cup of tea. I do a walk first. There's this great article that we found, we sourced from Harvard Business Review that you guys all have access to. You have so many you can view a month. So unless you're reading a ton of these articles, you might be locked out. But this was great in terms of some different ways to transition between work and personal time. And this is really more about mindfulness and being, conscious of where you're at and what kind of work you're doing at that time. And I'm the first to admit, I am not great at any of these things, which is why creating this presentation was really educational for me. I just don't want to pretend to be like, I have the best work-life balance. I really don't, but I'm really excited about some of these kind of strategies. This is probably my favorite one though, particularly as like a working mom. There's a lot of pressure as a parent to be perfect. There's a lot of pressure to be perfect at work. A lot of this is like self-inflicted pressure, but giving up on perfect is super important. Like I want you all to feel like there are strategies for you to shift a work-life balance if you're not comfortable with it, but giving up on, I did more work today than I meant to, and I didn't have as much time for my kids as I wanted. Like it turns into self-flagellation, really. So I think it's really helpful to just, not try to schedule yourself into perfect, not try to, at the end of the day, say, was that good or bad, right? I want to avoid the binaries. And I also want to be really realistic. There are some weeks, depending on your calendar and your industry, where you are not going to have a work-life balance. There are some weeks, depending on what your kids are up to or your family's doing or et cetera, that you won't have enough work in that work-life balance. But really thinking through like, it's not perfect. It's a work in progress. Every day is a work in progress. I'm going to try these tactics. They might work one day. They might not work the next day. It's not like a diet where I need to give it up because it's not the strategy that works for me. It's really just a matter of consciousness. And I think that that's part of what this whole work-life balance conversation is mindfulness. Like, how can I be mindful about how I'm using my time? What are the tools that exist externally in terms of that values inventory, for example, or that Harvard Business Review article? And then what are the tools that exist internally for me? I also think that it's helpful to have some accountability. So if you do feel like you're in a work-life balance situation that's really out of whack, having a friend or having a colleague who you check in with around that balance and your strategies can be super helpful, because a lot of us are in the same space. In the Career Center, we have a Friday happy hour, and this is a very common topic we bring up during that happy hour. It's every other week where we talk about, how do you feel like on the weekends when you see an email from a faculty member, like how do you not it? How do you feel about that? Or what's your tip or trick for closing windows and doing things like that? I think that peer accountability can be really useful. So but really, again, like giving up on perfect and not feeling like every choice you make has to get a letter grade, I think is super important. I want to talk about a couple things, like we'll have time for discussion, but I want to make sure you guys all know about Career Center services in terms of the drop-in coaching, which, frankly, if you're an alum, you'll probably want to make an appointment so you can meet with someone who's an industry expert. So we have virtual appointments for those folks. We also have an email resume review service that does have a little bit of a waiting time right now. It was more popular than we planned. We have a career library of over 50 handouts. Like I said before, if you don't already have access to Handshake, I will put a link in the chat in a couple minutes so you can see how to request access. All of our events are on there, as are, of course, our jobs and internships, as well as the opportunity to peer-to-peer message. So you could be messaging other alumni there. And then hopefully most of you know about the Alumni Sharing Knowledge Network, which is a whole platform for DePaul alumni. And this link will work. All these links are dynamic links when you get the slide deck. We also have an interviewing workshop coming up. We're kind of closing out on some of our winter programming, but the interviewing workshop is coming up. This is just a snapshot of the career library. What I don't have a nice slide for is to show you our incredible Using Your Strengths at Work Alumni Masterclass that's coming up, I think, in March. And Karen McCoy, the Associate Vice President of the Career Center, is going to be leading it. And she is Gallup Strengths certified. I'm so excited about getting her to do this because it's going to be a really great, probably relatively interactive experience. She'll go through the strengths and she'll go through how folks can identify them and how they can use them at work. Now, let me quickly stop share. I would love for us to use some time for questions while I pull up some of these links that I've talked about. I see a quick question. Let's see. I don't have an age, but I get what you do if you must take off for a child at school. There's so much to say about parenting. I didn't want to make this exclusively parenting focused. I was really worried that I would make it parenting focused given my own situation, or even gendered. But I will say this, like, that is one of the challenges of the pandemic. Obviously, childcare has had a huge impact on how people's work-life balance, and the lack of childcare primarily. And it's going to vary a lot by employer in terms of how like my employer is absolutely okay with me doing a meeting with, a kid in the background. I work in higher ed. There's so much flexibility. Obviously that kid can't be screaming or, having a tantrum, but I have a lot of flexibility. Other people, they don't have that. So there's so much conversation about, can I bring family in to help? And I think that particularly a lot of moms out there, at least this was my experience. I felt like, well, I'm at home. If they're in the background, no big. Last summer I thought I don't really need a ton of childcare because I'm here. Sorry, some kind of a plant gnat over here. But what I realized really quickly was that there's no way I can be productive without and they're 9 and 6. They're an easy age. but without getting them some kind of chaperone for 3 hours a day, right? Like there's a different kind of productivity I had when they are with someone else who can answer questions or grab cereal, versus not with someone else. And I'm hoping this summer that'll shift a little bit as far as things open up. But there's a lot of great articles about work-life balance with children, that I can, sick child at school. Yeah. So if you have every employer is different. Again, like I said before, when my kids are sick, my boss is okay with me working half a day and then working, like maybe taking off half a day or counting as sick time. Most employers let you count children's days as sick time. And sometimes there's a limit on those. So a lot of that is based on your relationship with your supervisor, but balancing that, like for a younger child, you're better off saying, this isn't time I can use, right? When they get older, depending on how sick they are, it can be really challenging. I'm kind of just going through some things that are popping up on chat. New job. So in terms of maintaining work-life balance, if you are onboarding, like that's a whole separate ballgame. If you are someone who is just recently been hired, you're learning the culture, you have to learn all the procedures, you have to learn all this stuff. Your volume is going to be higher. And I think it's important to plan that in your calendar, to know that, okay, I'm going to get home from work and I have an hour and a half of other things I need to do for work, and to not create expectations for yourself and particularly for your family outside of that. And to make sure like there's some communication with your family around that. Or if you have a family, like I think it's important to understand that first 2 weeks, that first 3 weeks you're still proving yourself to your colleagues. And so I think that it's important to calendar in when there's a particular intensity to your schedule for really any reason. Anyone want to unmute and kind of talk about their experience with this or share their strategies for managing work-life balance? I'm happy for this to be kind of a more collaborative conversation or community conversation.
Hello.
Hi.
This is Artina.
Hi, Artina.
Okay. I'm the one who's been asking the questions.
Okay.
I can truly say for me, I don't have any kids, like I said before. Mm-hmm. And my mom is a daycare. Well, she worked at a daycare center. So mm-hmm. If I did have kids, all I had to do was to take the kids to her. With that in mind, my work-life balance is based on me not having children at all whatsoever. And what I do is basically I relax when I get home. Mm-hmm. So I commit myself completely 100% to my job. I'm a financial analyst normally when I'm working. Mm-hmm. And when I get home and watch TV and enjoy the pictures or whatever it might be. I take my vacations once a year and maybe twice a year if I'm going with my family. And I also have weekend getaways, and where is basically a mini trip, a road trip. And that's kind of how I balance my life. As far as I'm concerned, the biggest problem that I'm having right now, mm-hmm. I guess, is that I know how to do it and I'm very good at it. A lot of people just don't know how to balance their life, meaning that I get a lot of people jealous of what I do.
Yeah.
So that can become an issue in the end. My biggest thing is that usually I don't share. I'm a very private person. I don't share what I'm doing. Just do it. And you should be okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's worth pointing out. In my workplace, we have very few parents, and it can sometimes be hard to relate to people who are in different circumstances, on both sides. So I think that that's where it's been, you seek out the people in your workplace who have similar arrangements for those conversations, because then there isn't this like, how does that work? Or there's just a shared experience and a shared empathy that I think can be really important. And I think that that's one of the challenges with being remote as well. We're missing out. It can feel like part of my workday was fully social, But now I don't, that social piece is significantly diminished for me. And everything I'm doing is a meeting and is work. And so that has also kind of triggered a shift in my personal work-life balance. I don't know if that's true for other folks, but anyone else like to kind of contribute to that or add their experience?
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm an alumni. I graduated back in 2018 with my master's. I'm also a double demon too, so
Congrats.
fun fact about that. I work in the logistics industry, so as you know, I'm a software engineer in that field. Problem is, since there's a lot of volume in e-commerce shipments for the past year and a half, actually our company's growing. Problem is I'm doing more work on the weekends than because of just the amount of workload that's assigned to me. I'm just trying to figure out a way to like balance that stuff out because it's mostly with project deadlines. I don't know if I should really be talking to like my project manager about that, about certain deadlines. Like, I'm not sure if that's a good idea based on my current workload kind of thing.
I mean, I think that's where that one sample, I think at least scripted a little bit of how you could request that in a non-confrontational way. You could be like, hey, I would love to talk to you about right now the projects I'm working on and how this is mapping out into my calendar because I need your help. Now, the challenge right now is I truly think across many, many industries, employers are getting more work out of people and are pretty happy about that. I think we're getting to a point where we have to advocate for ourselves, certainly. But it's a delicate balance, right? And that's where some people choose to, obviously you can have a conversation with your project manager, but there are other folks who are like, okay, what's a role that would allow more work-life balance? Maybe the same function, but in a different industry. I'm not saying go find a different job. I'm certainly not saying that because that's a whole nother workload in and of itself. But I am saying that that's part of certain industries, right? So like corporate accounting or the big four, there's times of year where you're never going to see those people. They're working their behinds off. And it is a big reason I ended up in higher ed, which was, okay, there's this like, we get it. It's 9 to 5-ish. But I do think the pandemic has shifted that for a lot of people, and you can't count on your employer to advocate for you. Not to say that they won't once you ask for that advocacy, but I think it's worthwhile flipping on them. Like, show me how I could do this faster or better.
Yeah, there's a lot of internal problems at my organization regarding like documentation and stuff like that for how certain processes work. So that's also kind of the contributing factor as to why I've been working extra.
Well, and that's where I think I can tell you right now, when this pandemic is over and any employer who doesn't understand, there's going to be a talent drain as far as any in-demand skills. Like, I think once that economy improves a little bit, and depending on how in demand your role is, that could be happening now. Like if higher education doesn't shift to offering some more flexibility than they typically have offered, we're going to lose a ton of staff. And because they'll be empowered, they've seen what they can do, they've seen the flexibility that works. And I think the workers essentially will have more, I don't know if I'd say stability. They'll have, if you're in an in-demand field, you'll have more options essentially. So that's something to think about. That's for anybody to really scope out what industries, what roles, what companies actually do have a work-life balance. Like my brother worked in technology at Amazon. And at that time, this was a little while ago, it was 12 hours on, and he loved the work he did, but the lifestyle piece that he really was interested in ended up working. Now he works in computer support at a veterans hospital because he found that this was a space that had a different philosophy around, it's a non-for-profit, it's government. So it's just a little more stability and less profit-oriented environment.
Okay.
It sounds like I'm telling everyone to go work at the VA. I'm not telling them that, I promise.
Yeah. Thank you. That was really informative. Funny thing is like at my current job, we actually have a pretty well-established work-from-home infrastructure already set up before the pandemic, because we already have employees working from across essentially the world. We have some people from the Netherlands and Singapore and in the U.S. and here in Chicago and Tulsa, Oklahoma.
I think
So
the
already,
that work from home thing is going to, at some point though, employers are going to figure out that they can get more work out of people. Well, I'll have to figure out how to make sure that we get this better balance post pandemic. I feel like nothing's in balance right now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I do see, I threw in the chat a link to our website where we describe what Handshake is. And then if you don't have a Handshake account, I put in a request for a Handshake account. If you have a DePaul alumni account, you can use that. But if you don't, they can create a Handshake account for a personal email. So I don't know the ins and outs of that. We definitely have on the first link, the resources page, we do have a contact person there who will know more about like the account creation, but also feel free to just do the form and they'll follow up if they need a different email address from you. But we do have a lot of alumni on here and I just wouldn't want you to miss any of our other events. I do see another question about, okay, so creating work-life balance. This is a great question. I love talking to folks about the balance between job search and life, because job search feels like a 40-hour-a-week job that doesn't pay, of course, and doesn't have the structure of other jobs. So I would agree, Megan, this is a really hot topic. There's a lot of folks we're working with. My number one tip is that accountability group. My number one tip on balancing job search and life is to get yourself a friend or two. There's a lot of like libraries have job search clubs, rec centers have job search clubs, workforce centers have job search clubs, but you could even just do you and a buddy every Tuesday at 4:00, you do a check-in on what you accomplished that week. The benefit of that is it turns something that seems a little like screaming into the void into an interactive experience, right? Like you're not just job searching. The other benefit of that is that it also turns it a little social. So it's like you have this peer-to-peer empathetic experience of like, oh, you applied there. God, that cover letter was probably really hard to write. Da, 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 da. That can be really helpful. If you're really not sure if you're doing it right and you feel like you're just sending out 300 applications into the void, definitely meet with one of our career advisors, because we have a lot of tips about both really kind of customizing the resume and cover letter, making it through the applicant tracking system, and project managing the job search. One of my favorite handouts that we created was based on my experience, because my husband moved us from Minnesota to Chicago. And then he moved us, I did it wrong already. He moved us from Minnesota to Boston. I had 2 kids, landed in Boston with no job, had to do a job search while trying to figure out where kids were going to go to school or whatever. And then we moved to Chicago a year after that. So 2 years in a row, I was doing a crazy amount of job search while parenting. And we have this wonderful resource. I'm going to put the link in the chat here, and it's about project managing the job search, so that what I like to say is every resume and cover letter, once you've kind of created this process, should take 7 to 10 minutes. I don't want it to take more than that. And the key to that, sorry, I'm still looking for this job search tips, organizing your job search. The key to that is organizing the search and tracking the search and using a spreadsheet to track ones you searched, which resume and cover letter was for what kind of job, the real secret sauce. So that's a resource I put at the bottom of the chat. In fact, what I'll do is share screen really quickly. The real secret sauce of this is one section on this handout. So I'll try and make this a little bigger. So if you look at the back, this doesn't look like much, but if you use like a spreadsheet to search for jobs, right? And you throw them in this document, I strongly recommend one thing: score it. Like you're not applying to everything you put on here. So give it a score of 1 to 5. That'll help you out instantly, because now we'll know which ones to prioritize. Definitely track posting date if possible, because more recent is better. Most importantly, please track the type of role you've applied to. So for example, if you're doing software development and logistics, that would be software development logistics. If you're doing software development, I'm trying to think of another space for that. For a game company, that would be that. If you're doing events and marketing, label that. The reason I want every role to have a label is because as you apply to more jobs, you will know exactly which resume and cover letter that you previously tailored to use as your template. And you will no longer be spending an hour Frankensteining 5 different resumes and cover letters into one. You will truly just be tweaking a single or 2 resumes and cover letters into a single thing that works for the kind of job you're applying to. Some of you might have like 8 types of roles you're interested in, and some of you might have 3. So it just depends on who you are. I had about 7 different ones when I was applying. And what I discovered in the first search was that I kept forgetting, like, was that employer the one where I would be doing advising and academic advising? Was that one this one? I couldn't remember, and I'd have to go through and read and It took forever. So this is really a pro tip for time management and for tracking your search. And we also recommend now that in addition to this tab in a spreadsheet, to maintain a networking tab. I'm literally telling my students, and this sounds again like this is going to take forever, but if you systematize it and you reach out for informational interviews, like divide up, block some of the things you need to do for your job search so that you're not just sending applications. Some of this is networking too, and I would block that. Managing that with life means giving yourself a break. All the people I'm working with who are super job seeking don't give themselves any break at all. And they're just like, they wake up Saturday sweating, like, how many jobs do I need to apply to today? If you systematize the search, you're going to have a track record of the accomplishments you've had. And then if you get a peer or a buddy system going, it's going to make it even better. The other thing you can do is meet with a career advisor. I have a lot of students who met with me 3 weeks in a row just to get the ball rolling and to feel like, okay, I got to handle this process. And now I feel like I know how I'm using my time. I see another question about, can you really change jobs knowing you have more experience in your current field than your degree and MBA in accounting at University of Phoenix? Okay, so the career pivot is a whole different ballgame. If you want to, I have a whole deck on the pivot process. You can absolutely pivot. There's a lot of variables regarding what to what, right? So if you are, if you have an MBA in accounting and you're trying to get, I'm assuming you have an MBA in accounting and you want an accounting role, but you're not currently in an accounting role. Is that correct? We'll assume that's correct.
I forgot I can unmute it. No, I actually had, I've been in finance and accounting for years. Mm-hmm. It was a follow-up question to the question that was asked.
Oh, okay. Well, one thing I'll say about a pivot or transition is it's all about storytelling. It's an art, not a science. Networking is a big part of it, but so is figuring out what your brand statement is. These are all things we do with folks in the Career Center. So if you're someone who's like, I have a target, I'm not sure how to get there, we can help map out how to get there, what that pivot is. Every pivot conversation or transition conversation I have is different because it's going to depend what to what. Truly, like if you could be going, I just worked with a K-12 teacher who wanted to move into events and marketing. And so we just thought through, okay, well, this could be a pivot from K-12 teaching to events and marketing for let's say an education focused nonprofit. This could be a pivot. So like, that's kind of an adjacent pivot. This could be a pivot into ed tech, doing events and marketing. So like thinking through what are the pathways. It's not easy to do for yourself. It's a lot easier for us to do with you. So that's the other benefit of getting a handshake account, is that you can then schedule an appointment to meet with one of our career advisors. And they are all industry specific in terms of the kinds of knowledge they have. Every student and alum has access to all the career communities at the Career Center. Are there other things I haven't talked about? Questions? We tried doing a job search club in the fall, but it ended up just being, everybody was in such a different place. I think it actually does work a lot better when you're working with someone who's either in a similar field or who's just a friend in your social circle, because then there's like, that meeting is really kind of half social, half getting things done. I have worked with a couple students who have paired up with each other for the job search accountability group, but meeting with a career advisor just a couple times can sometimes do the trick as well, where we just get your documents in order. I'm going to quickly grab the pivot slide deck for any of those of you who are interested. I have to open my drive to grab that out of there. Most of our sessions are on YouTube, but some are on mine, some are on the DePaul Career Center YouTube. So if you ever see a session and you're wondering where it's at, you can always reach out to me. I'm going to put my email address in here. I will confess I am not the most talented email replier. This is a real skill I don't have. And the real source of my work-life balance challenges, but I will reply eventually, and I'm happy to answer questions. I don't currently have advising hours in Handshake, but there's plenty of availability with the other staff in the Career Center on Handshake. And we have a lot of ambassadors as well. At DePaul, if you hire a student employee, you sometimes end up with someone who's been in a career for 10 years, which is wild. And it's one of my favorite things about DePaul. Let me quickly do, I think this is let me just make sure I'm sharing the right thing. Okay, I'm going to share the link. Share. Grabbing the link, copy, and I'll put it in here. So here, for anyone who's interested, here is that's the link to the Planning a Pivot. And then I'm also going to put a link to our beautiful career library in here. We are so proud of it. It's just so tactical and very like from basic to advanced content. That's my favorite thing about it. That's the link for the career library. I'm also, while there's questions, I'm also going to just quickly send out a quick poll. We do this at the end of all of our sessions. And I'm also going to bring up the description for the next masterclass because it is going to be incredible. Let me pull it up so I can show you what it looks like. But like I said, so much of the stuff we're doing would be useful for you guys. I'm doing a skills lab this Friday on the career of product management, which a lot of people don't know about. So I'm really excited about that. Lots of stuff that I think would be useful for alumni. Let me open this up real quick. I will share screen and I will show you this cool event we've got coming. Whoops, switch to students account. So this is happening on March 9th from 5 to 6. And Kara McCoy is presenting this. And like I said, she is strength certified and she's going to discuss the difference between skills and strengths, how to identify strengths and ways to be sure you're using your strengths at work. So this is great for anyone who's currently employed, anyone who isn't. If you don't want a Handshake account and you just want the Zoom link, I can send it to you. We just use Handshake as a way to track our events. So that's why we push registering on there. There's a question. I'm not, Kiji?
Yes. Hi. I wonder, like, how, like, I'm going to document and keep everything that you're offering, but like, how often do you see that these documents or these structures change?
You mean the strategies?
Not the I mean, not the strategies, but because I've been trying to get to know Handshake and what the Career Center is offering, and I was just, because you know how times change and how like, for example, maybe like resumes or just the way things are done sometimes like change drastically.
Yeah.
And from your experience, do you see drastic changes that has been happening like over the years, or has the content that is available right now kind of been consistent?
Well, this career library is new. So I will say, yes, things have changed drastically. When I got to DePaul in 2017, we were using handouts from 2011, 2014, and I couldn't believe it. Everything changed between now and then, and things are changing very rapidly. It's definitely our commitment to update things. Applicant tracking systems are the biggest change in terms of, like, obviously those existed before, but now they are everything. 95% of jobs use them, and they are tracking skills-based keywords. So absolutely, things have changed wildly. I'm now telling students, I'm recommending summaries on resumes. I'm never doing an objective. I'm recommending sans serif. I'm recommending, and of course there's exceptions, you know, for a tech resume, I need your skills at the top. There are things that have changed according to industry and then across the board as well in terms of how people hire and how things work digitally. LinkedIn has only become more and more important. It really is taking over the market as far as like the social media version of your resume. Things have changed quickly. This library was built in the last year, so I feel pretty good about most of the advice. Some of the gaps we have right now in this library are navigating identity, diversity, and inclusion issues. That was definitely always intended for layer 2, but that's a space we're building on now in terms of like mitigating bias, diversity recruitment pipelines, and things like that. But absolutely, that stuff changed quickly. I think it will continue to change. I don't know. Most of the change that's happened in the last couple of years has really been around applicant tracking systems and as well as how employers hire. But I can tell you right now, the one-sided video interview, if you haven't done that, that's going to take over the whole video. That's going to replace a phone screener, no question, because no one does it. It's the computer that does it. So yeah, these things change quickly and we're really committed at DePaul to keeping our information up to date. But is there any particular subject area you were interested in?
No, I would have to comb through the library and find specific questions. But I was just wondering, just in general, because I'm revamping my resume and just prepping for just gathering my stuff to get back on the job search.
Sure.
And I was just wondering, like, how recent is all this? Has all this stuff been updated? And if so, or if not, like, how often does it change? That's what I was just thinking.
Yeah, so that's all new content. You can see the newest content is the COVID specific content. I think the number one change that you'll want to really think through are the applicant tracking systems obviously existed, but they're looking for skills. So we're in a heavy skills economy and certain skills became more saleable during the pandemic. And certain technologies became more common. So for example, LinkedIn has a top 10 skills they do every year. I don't know if I've seen the one for this year. They usually put them out in January. But for example, like video editing was in the top 10 in 2020 for a lot of reasons. Now that we're all kind of using these channels and even experts, you know, non-experts need to know some of these tools. Content management systems, cloud computing, those are skills that I recommend students have and alumni have on their resumes. And by content management system, I'm talking like Drupal, SharePoint, Wix, Squarespace, whatever. A lot of them are pretty interchangeable. So there's definitely some top skills that you could track. LinkedIn does a really good job of collecting those, but the other way to collect those is looking at current job openings in your industry, and you're going to see some technologies that appear over and over and over. I just want most folks to feel empowered to not have to spend 30 hours teaching themselves a tool, but upskilling quickly, which is why we started offering skills labs this fall. Because what I kept finding was that students or alumni who were job seeking weren't getting through an applicant tracking system because they didn't have the one little thing on there, you know, the one little skill that they didn't need to be a master of, they just needed some experience with. So that's why we're offering a bunch of skills labs around that stuff. But yeah, this stuff changes quickly. The pandemic has forced faster change. And I think interviewing and remote work management are going to change or have already changed essentially. But we do have a mastering the video interview handout. So that's at least a demonstration of that. Most of our stuff is pretty up to date, but as things change, we're definitely going to be editing that content because I don't ever want to go back to when, you know, we had handouts from 2011 in the year 2017. Any other questions? I'm going to stop recording because who's ever going to watch this does not want to see all of this.